You mentioned that you've had a ton of people tag you on Instagram and share their pictures of them reading this book. Did you anticipate the success that you would have with this book? And again, for me personally, I don't read too often, but I had to get my hands on the book. I even got the audio version for myself. And I have friends who don't ever read, and they're asking me how they can read this book. So, did you anticipate the success that this book would have?
I did not. I honestly was not sure that I was going to be able to sell this book to a publisher because, you know, how interested are folks that are not native themselves or Sicangu? How interested are they going to be in a book set on Rosebud? And so I wasn't sure. To my delight, about 4 or 5 large New York publishers wanted to buy it, and the best fit was HarperCollins, the division called Echo. So they published it. They've been a dream to work with. I love Echo. They are one of the best publishers out there. And I really love the cover they designed for it. I worked with some wonderful editors there. So, now having said that, I did not anticipate that the book was going to take off the way it has. And I'm happy to share with you that just about 2 weeks ago, it was nominated for something called the Edgar Award. So the Edgar Award is like the Oscars for crime fiction. It's usually a black tie affair. I don't own a tux. I was going to have to rent a tux, and travel to New York, and it's televised, and you have to, I think, write a speech, and then I think the camera's on you, and so if you lose, you have to be like, oh, yay, the way they do at the Oscars, or I think it's televised online or something. But because of the pandemic, obviously, it won't be televised. I won't be going to New York. I'll just be kind of sitting in my sad office here. But it was nominated for Best First Novel by the Mystery Writers of America, and I'm just tremendously honored. It's sold well. It was made a main selection of the Book of the Month Club, so it's just gone out to tens of thousands of people. So truly, I did not anticipate it. But what I've tried to do is take what little attention I'm getting now and use it to bring, shine a light on the issues that Native people are suffering right now. As I said, I've donated all my speaking fees to the Rosebud COVID-19 Relief Fund. I'm trying to do what I can to benefit the community.
Great.
Now that you've raised a ton of awareness on Indigenous issues, what do you hope that non-Native people will do with that, everything they know now? What do you hope would happen, and what good would come from that?
Well, like I was saying before, I hope that there's just a dialogue, okay, that so people understand that we have problems with our medical system, getting decent care, with our criminal justice system, but lots of other things, like I don't think a lot of people know sort of the discomfort that we have with Mount Rushmore, given that the Black Hills are sacred to us. And I think a lot of people didn't know that. Now, obviously, if you're Lakota, you know this, but a lot of people didn't understand that Mount Rushmore is just a kind of a giant screw you to Native peoples, and so I'm hoping to raise awareness, and I do lots of many televised events with book clubs, and the people are so grateful. They're like, Dave, we just didn't know this, like we didn't know that Native spirituality was criminalized until 1978. We didn't know that the Black Hills are sacred. We didn't know all of these things. So, there have been other, obviously many wonderful Native writers of whom I'm standing on their shoulders, but there haven't been as many from the Sicangu nation, although Joseph Marshall III is fantastic. I mean, I have such respect for him, as well as Albert Whitehat, Senior, I think, yeah, Senior, or is it Junior, who wrote the Lakota language. He just passed on to the spirit world. So there have been, Virginia Driving Hawk Sneeve, another one. There have been a lot of great Oglala and some Sicangu writers, so I want to acknowledge them and give them the respect that they're due. But I did want to take my expertise in criminal justice and just raise awareness.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was just going to ask about was how did your legal background, help or, kind of frame the book?
So my great question. So my legal training had more to do with, I think, understanding the legal system, because the criminal justice system on reservations is very, very complicated. We have these overlapping jurisdictions. Who has authority to prosecute depends on, who committed the crime, who the victim is, where the crime allegedly took place. I mean, there are all of these factors that come in. And so I think my legal training allowed me hopefully to kind of understand that better and sort of set the stage so that, the book is accurate. Now, I want to be clear here. It's a book of fiction. I did take some liberties. Okay. This is not a book of journalism. It's not a work of journalism. I purposely, I've dramatized some things, and I've had a couple of people, somebody sent me this outraged email. It's like, well, you misstated this and this and this, and I'm like, look, it's a work of fiction. Okay. But I think that the book is overall accurate in terms of depicting the criminal justice system and how it often fails Native people.
I think just reading this book, I felt so many moments of empowerment, and I could relate to so much that actually happened in this book. And I think on today's episode, a lot of people who are viewing this were expecting to just only hear about the book itself. So to hear the context and all your background and all the motivation that you came from this book. I mean, let's talk a little bit more just about the book itself, because I'm really curious as to where Virgil came from.
Yeah, so Virgil Wounded Horse as a vigilante was inspired by some stories I've heard both on and off res. I've heard about private vigilantes on other reservations. And so I'd kind of been aware of this for a while. I don't know any enforcers myself. So again, he is a fictional character, but I know these folks do exist in certain places. I should note as well that there's another vigilante on TV. If you're aware of the Longmire TV series, which is written by a friend of mine, the crime writer, Craig Johnson, who's just a wonderful guy. And in fact, he wrote a nice blurb statement of the book. In his TV series, I think there's a native vigilante, I want to say called Hector. I could be wrong about this. It's been a while since I've seen it. But so there is, a precedent of vigilantes on native reservations. Now, I first wrote Virgil Wounded Horse's character in a short story that I wrote back in graduate school back in 2011. Now, in that short story, I killed off Virgil. I had him die at the end. And so that story is still floating around. It was published in the Yellow Medicine Review, which is a native fiction journal. And so I killed him off, and I thought that I was done with Virgil Wounded Horse. But over the years, his character just stayed with me. I just kept thinking, oh man, Virgil is such an interesting and complicated character. He carries so many different motivations. He hurts people for a living, but on the other hand, he's really loving with his nephew, and he just has so many different angles to him. And so about 4 years ago, I said, I need to resurrect Virgil. Okay. So even though he died in the short story, I said, I need to bring him back. And so I decided to try my hand at writing a novel. So this is my first novel. Okay. I don't have a lot of experience. This is the first time. And that's why I'm just so deeply honored that people have responded to it so well. So Virgil Wounded Horse is inspired by real events, but I do not know a private vigilante myself.
We got a question on Facebook, and I was wondering the same, and it might be too early to even ask, but are there plans for Virgil's next adventure?
Yes, I am thrilled to answer that. There is a sequel, which I am working on right now. So there is a 100% certainty that there will be a second book involving Virgil Wounded Horse. It is tentatively titled Wounded Horse. I'm writing it right now. I can tell you that all of the characters that you liked in the book will be back. I'll give a teaser. You guys have been so great here. Marie, who a lot of people really love the character of Marie Shortbear. So Marie in the next book is going to run for tribal council. So sort of to atone for the sins of her father, and I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but she's going to run for tribal council in the next book. Nathan, the 14-year-old, is back. The book will take place 1 year later. He will have transferred to St. Francis, interestingly enough, from Todd County. He's going to transfer to St. Francis. He's got his girlfriend, but he's going to turn into a little bit of a jerk. He's going to want to become a vigilante like his uncle. But Virgil's going to be like, no, you need to go to college. You need to do all these things. So I've got a lot of things brewing up here. I will say, I also have some short stories involving Virgil that are coming out soon. I wrote a short story titled Skin that will appear in an anthology featuring Virgil and Tommy, who's also in the book. It'll appear in an anthology called Midnight Hour in September of 2021. In this short story, again, I'm going to give away a little bit of a spoiler here, but Charlie Leadercharge, the attorney, calls up Virgil, says, I need you to go to this religious school outside of Rapid City and steal a book for me. And Virgil's going to say, look, I'm not a thief. Okay. I'll do this, but I don't steal stuff. Okay. And why do you want this book anyway? And so the lawyer explains to Virgil that this is a book, it's about 200 years old, and it's displayed prominently in this religious school. And Virgil says, why do you want me to steal a book? Well, the book it's bound in the skin of a murdered Native person. So the book itself, its cover, is bound in the skin of a Native person that was murdered, and then their flesh turned into a book cover. Now, that's all I'm going to tell you about what happens. Now, this was inspired by an actual event here in Denver, Colorado, okay? In the Iliff Theological Seminary, which is a religious school here in Denver, they had a book prominently displayed for 60 some years called The History of Christianity. Its cover was made from the tanned flesh of a murdered Native person. It is horrific. Finally, they shamed the school into getting rid of that book. This has haunted me for a long time. The fact that somebody would be so inhumane as to bind a book in the flesh of a human and then display it proudly. So this is based on a real event. And so I'd been wanting to turn that into fiction for a long time. I know it's disturbing. I can see the looks on your faces. It's a disturbing thing, but it's true. It's 100% true. And I have to give props to my friend Tink Tinker, who's a professor of Indigenous Studies at the school. He's a Native person. He led the charge to have this book removed. He said, this is sickening and disgusting. And so he was able to do a lot of work to get that book removed. And the cover was given to somebody. It was properly buried. So thankfully, there was a good ending in real life. The short story, I'll keep quiet about what happens.
For as disturbing as that is, I mean, I think without you, many of us wouldn't even know about that. So I'm so grateful that you know what your talents are and you're sharing that with the rest of the world. And it's even better that you're Lakota. So very grateful for that. We did get another question on the live, somebody asking, aside from the sequel that you're writing, are you working on any other pieces of writing at this time?
So really just, thank you for the question, whoever sent it in, really just the short story in the next book. So my book, I'm under, the sequel to Winter Counts is under deadline. And so I'm working on that pretty much night and day to get that done. I do have a number of other essays that I've written. I published an essay in the New York Times back in July, where I talk about the Major Crimes Act and how it hurts Indigenous people. If folks want to read some of my other writing, go to davidweiden.com and you can see what I wrote about the Major Crimes Act in the New York Times. I also wrote some articles. I wrote an article about the most important Native crime writers. I wrote another article, Why Indigenous Crime Fiction Matters. So I have lots of little pieces floating around there that they're all linked on my page. But I do plan to write some essays. I plan to write a series of nonfiction essays. Not to get all dark again, but I plan to write about some of the violence that seems to follow Native people. So I have two sons. My oldest son, I've already mentioned David Jr. My youngest son is Sasha. So here in Denver, almost exactly 2 years ago, I got a call from my ex-wife while I was teaching, back when we actually taught live, and she's like, you need to get home quickly. There's a gunman at Sasha's school." And indeed, my son, a gunman burst in to my son's middle school and started killing people. And so I drove like crazy to get in there. We couldn't reach our son on his cell phone. We didn't know if he was alive or dead. It turns out he was hiding in a closet with the other students, and he could hear the gunshots that killed a young man who was, in my view, a hero, Kendrick Castillo. He was Latino and indigenous, and this young man rushed the gunman, took 3 shots in the chest, died, but his bravery allowed another group of kids to rush the gunman and disarm him. Okay, this actually happened to me. You think it's something you read about in the papers, these school shootings, and then it happens to you. And thankfully, my son is fine. He survived. He hid in that closet. But it made me, think about, obviously the violence, the genocide of indigenous people that happened across the North American continent. And here it is, the 21st century, and I'm having to get a call, that my son might have been murdered. Again, I know this is a dark and tough story to tell, and I want to keep this happy and all that, but it's also life, and so I plan to write about this. I do have an essay on it right now, and so I'm waiting for the right time. So yes, there are definitely down the road for me some nonfiction essays about what it means to be indigenous in the 21st century.
Wow, that's had to have been an really intense experience. So just a little bit about Denver. I used to live in Denver before my time in Rosebud. And so I was just wondering, everybody's into sustainability and the environment, but I guess at the time I didn't fully realize it, but now in my visits back to Denver, there seems to be kind of an absence of that, kind of full picture of wokeness. Like people are all about the environment, sustainability, like I said, but the indigenous voices seem, in my opinion, to really be missing from that. And I was just wondering about your experience, born and raised in Denver, as an indigenous person.
Well, I love Denver, Colorado. It's my hometown. Like I said, I grew up here. I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood called Swansea, Elyria, but I'd spend most summers on the reservation in Mission. I think my auntie owned the Antelope Motel. Where is that? Right at the corner of 83, and I'm forgetting where that is. And so so I love Denver, but it's changed. It's gentrifying. There is a native presence here. We have the Denver Indian Center. We have, some organizations, but I'm not going to lie, it's hard to raise my kids with indigenous values here in the city. So I take them back to the reservation as much as I can, but they're suburban kids. They want to play their video games. They don't always love coming to the res, but I'm trying to plant a seed, that I hope will flower later on. So I do love Denver. I built a lot of 3 chapters in the book take place in Denver just because I wanted to write about Denver. So I built in a lot of stuff that will make sense to Denver people. So native Denverites will catch a lot of the things. Like I have a scene in there that takes place in Casa Bonita, which is a kind of a famous restaurant here in Denver. That's kind of like a theme park and restaurant. And we love it here. I should also note that I built in a lot of stuff for native readers. So my native readers, they get the stuff that others don't. Like I built in a reference to Bethany Yellowtail, the great fashion designer and all that. And I have one character, he wants to be called Snagmore. So my buddy, Stephen Graham Jones, who's an indigenous horror writer, he thought that was just the funniest thing ever, that I called one of the characters, the 14-year-old kid, Snagmore. He does love that. But if you're not native, a lot of this is just going to go by you. And then I also built in a lot of stuff for crime fiction readers. So if you are a specialist in mystery, suspense, and crime fiction, there's a lot of stuff in there that those folks are going to catch that others won't. I built in a tribute to a native crime writer in the book. I'll reveal it here. I actually haven't publicly before. There's a hidden tribute to the native writer Lewis Owens in there. Lewis Owens is a very important native crime writer, maybe the most important indigenous crime writer. and he's sort of my hero in a lot of ways. So I built in a hidden tribute to him and to one other crime writer. So I tried to build in like Easter eggs and references for each sort of group of readers.
Well, David, I just wanted to share a comment that we got from our local Boston doctors that work at Rosebud IHS. They said, "We loved your book and are encouraging new doctors that come to Rosebud to read it." So just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. And I just want to say here that thank you, doctors. And the doctor that's in the book is not in any way, you guys, whoever sent the comment, okay, I built a doctor in there who's maybe not super friendly. And I want to say that I respect anyone who is coming to the reservation, you know, and helping Indigenous people. I dramatized things, you know, for effect. And I just want to say that I have the utmost respect for, you know, physicians who are coming and helping Indigenous people. So thank you so much for that comment.
So as Jillian mentioned earlier, like there are some people who maybe, you know, this book is sparking some interest, myself included. Are there any other recommendations that you would have for us to add to our reading list once we finish Winter Counts?
Yes. Now again, if you're Native, a lot of this stuff you may already know about, but I'm often asked by non-Native people, you know, Dave, what is a good book that I can read to learn about Native issues? And so what I recommend typically is a wonderful book by my friend, the Native writer, David Troyer. So he wrote a book called The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. And it is a fantastic book. It was nominated for the National Book Award, I think 2 years ago. And it's a work of history, but David Troyer's thesis is that people think that Native people have vanished, that Wounded Knee, the massacre of Wounded Knee was the end of it for us, you know, that was, you know, the end of Native peoples. He's like, no, we're still here, we're surviving, we're thriving. And he makes the point that Native history is American history. To understand America, you need to understand Native history. I love this book. And if you want to learn about that stuff, it is a wonderful book to start with, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee. And I happen to know, I hope it's okay, David, that I say this. I'm sure he's not watching. He's a busy guy, but he's doing a version for young readers. So he's got a version of the book for young readers, which is coming out in about a year. So I would really recommend that book. Another book, I have to say, my buddy Brandon Hobson, who's a Cherokee citizen, he has a new book which just released last week. It's called The Removed. It is fantastic. He was also nominated for the National Book Award, which is like a big honor in our field. It is fantastic. It will haunt you. Read that. I've already mentioned my buddy Stephen Graham Jones. The Only Good Indians is a wonderful Indigenous horror book. You're going to love that. And then finally, my buddy Kelly Jo Ford, who wrote a wonderful, she's also Cherokee, a book called Crooked Hallelujah. And it's short stories and wonderful. So, you know, you can't go wrong with any of those books. I vouch for them.
Sounds like we have a lot of reading to do. I'm excited. Well, as we get close to wrapping this up, I just want to say, first of all, David, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. And we have a lot of people of all ages who watch the show, and they're mostly right here on the Rosebud Reservation. Do you have a positive message that you would like to leave off with today?
I do. I just want to say that I wrote this book because too often Native peoples, if you watch us on TV, if you watch TV, we don't often show up on TV, right? I mean, either like, you know, it's like some historical movie set in the 1800s, or there's the poverty porn, you know, where you know, back in White Clay when those still had the liquor stores, you know, they'd, you know, I think Diane Sawyer came and like had to film all those people there, the drunk folks. And I want to say that the point of this book is that there is a humor and a resilience and a wonderfulness to Native people, and especially the Sicangu people. And that was my point in writing this book. And so I just want everybody to know here that you know, we have to embrace our culture. You know, within our culture is really the way that we're going to solve all of our problems. I am not fluent in the language. I'm trying, okay, you know, and this virus is killing off so many of our language speakers, you know, And, but I just want to say that we need to embrace our culture. And I really believe that that is the way that we can take care of our issues on our own terms.
Very well said, David. Well, we're going to go ahead and end it here. Again, thank you so much. I know a lot of people couldn't watch the interview live, but they were really looking forward to watching it later. So this will be recorded, and feel free to share it. And thank you so much, David. We'll hopefully talk to you again soon after the sequel comes out.
Wonderful.
I have one last question. When is the movie coming out?
I know.
So I am not allowed to mention anything yet. All I can tell you is that there has been significant interest, but until, documents are signed and everything, what I can tell you is, let's just say hypothetically, that if there were to be interest in this, I have insisted upon Indigenous writers, and I will try my best, if a thing were to be filmed, to have it filmed on Rosebud. Now writers, we, in the movie process, we have the least power of anyone, okay? But to the extent that I'm able to influence the process at all, I want to make sure that in fact, I insisted that there's a Native presence in the writing room, and that if possible, it be shot on the Rosebud Res. So no promises on what's going to happen, but fingers crossed.
Amazing.
Man, wouldn't that be something? I would be so excited for that.
I'd move on for that. Make
Yeah,
walking in the background.
Fingers crossed.
All right, Doksha, David.
Doksha, bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Wapila.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.